Khost lies at the kind of border where maps hesitate. The terrain changes faster than cartographers can agree upon, as if the land itself refuses to be documented. From above, it appears lifeless, ridges of ochre and dust stitched together by dry riverbeds. But on the ground, everything hums faintly. The air trembles, carrying no birdsong, no engine noise, only a low vibration that feels like the earth remembering itself. Old soldiers used to say the desert doesn't sleep. It listens. At first, it seems like poetry. But after enough nights, the truth in it becomes harder to dismiss. There's a certain weight in silence here. Something close to patience, as though the soil is waiting for someone specific to return. Even the wind seems measured, moving not to erase tracks, but to keep them fresh. When the new patrol arrived, their radios clicked every few seconds, no voice, no interference, just small electronic heartbeats marking time. They thought it was normal, routine. Every soldier, in every war, grows used to strange noises. But one technician noticed that the intervals between clicks weren't random. They formed a steady rhythm, repeating after long pauses, almost like breath. The base engineer blamed old wiring. Command didn't care. But that night, standing on the edge of the dunes, one sergeant swore he felt the ground pulse once, softly, like something under the surface was listening back. The dig site was not meant to uncover anything. It was routine groundwork for a temporary outpost. Mark the coordinates, check soil density, log the data, move on. But Khost had a habit of turning routines into stories. By noon, the engineers' boots sank ankle deep into soft sand that looked freshly laid, though no wind had moved since dawn. Beneath it, metal struck metal. They brushed away grit to find fragments of a Soviet-era comms dish, fractured and half-melted, its surface scarred as if it had overheated from inside out. They laughed at first, taking photos, joking that even ghosts needed better reception. Then the static began. It wasn't loud, just a thin, layered murmur that crept into the headset of whoever stood closest to the broken dish. At first it sounded like feedback, then like whispers stacking on each other, overlapping until they formed a faint rhythm, almost conversational, almost human. One operator removed his earpiece, thinking the signal came from the base relay tower 20 kilometers east. But when he took a step back, the sound continued, through the sand itself, not the headset. Another man knelt and placed his hand flat on the ground. He felt a slow vibration, faint but regular, matching the pulse pattern from their earlier radio clicks. The report logged it as environmental interference. Command didn't ask for details, but that night, the man who'd touched the ground said he could still feel it under his skin, like the earth had memorized his heartbeat and decided to echo it back. When the sun sank behind the ridges, the desert changed its voice. The heat bled out of the air, and a thin veil of cool dust settled across the camp like quiet rain. The horizon no longer looked solid, just a blur of deep amber dissolving into black. From somewhere beyond the dunes came a soft, irregular clicking, almost mechanical, almost alive. The soldiers said nothing. After long deployments, silence becomes a language everyone understands. They set perimeter lights, their glow stretching far too short in the open plain. Beyond that halo, darkness pressed close, unbroken and complete. The sand itself gleamed faintly under starlight, every grain seeming to catch breath. One private, unable to sleep, stood by his post and listened. He could hear nothing but the pulse of wind brushing past his helmet and the occasional tick of cooling metal. Yet under it all was something else, a low undertone, too steady to be wind, too patient to be an echo. He wrote in his logbook, "It feels like the ground is awake." The words looked absurd by flashlight, but he didn't cross them out. At 02 Kwao, the radio crackled once. No voice, no static, just one soft exhale of sound that didn't repeat. Then the desert went perfectly still again, as if waiting for a reply. The morning after the static, orders came down without discussion. A new patrol was to move east toward the unmarked grid, the same coordinates where the signals had originated. The men gathered inside the prefab command tent, their faces half lit by the hum of an old generator. The air smelled of dust, fuel, and the faint sweetness of instant coffee gone cold. On paper, it was a simple reconnaissance assignment. Verify terrain, document remnants of an abandoned Soviet relay line, and return before dark. The captain's tone was measured, professional. He mentioned the radio irregularities only once, calling them harmless feedback loops. No one questioned it. They had all heard stranger things in stranger places. A medic joked under his breath, "Maybe the ghosts are still on comms." A few smiles, nothing more. But no one met his eyes. Outside, the vehicles waited in the morning haze, paint already dulled by fine sand. Each man checked his gear in silence, the unspoken rhythm of soldiers who knew routine better than reason. When the engines started, the sound seemed to fade before it reached the air, swallowed by the desert's distance. The convoy rolled out slow, leaving behind the camp's radio tower blinking faintly, like a single eye watching them disappear. By midday, the desert heat had turned thin and metallic. The horizon wavered like a sheet of glass, bending light and distance until direction felt imagined. The patrol moved carefully, engines low, wheels carving shallow grooves into the sand. They had been driving for hours, yet it felt as though the land never changed. Same ridges, same hollow sky, same silence waiting just beyond the hum of machinery. When they stopped to recalibrate the compass, a strange stillness settled over the team. No wind, no echo. Even footsteps seemed to disappear before reaching the ear. Then came the first sound, faint and deliberate. A tapping, as if someone below the surface was marking time with them. One soldier laughed nervously and stamped his boot, answering back. The sand, impossibly, responded with 2 taps in return. The radio picked up static, but not random static. The noise rose and fell in patterns, syllabic, like breathing through cloth. When the driver began humming to test interference, his melody came back seconds later, low and buried in static, but unmistakably mirrored. No one spoke after that, they simply listened, and the world seemed to narrow to the crackle of unseen air. A dust devil rose in the distance, circling their halted convoy once before collapsing into nothing. The air temperature dropped 5 degrees in less than a minute. Someone whispered, "It's listening." No one argued. For the first time, even the radio went quiet, not broken, not muted, just silent, as though it too was waiting for what came next. It happened just after sunset. The convoy had paused near a low ridge where the sand formed small, regular mounds, as though something beneath had once pressed upward and frozen in place. The light was dimming fast, that strange Afghan twilight when the world seems neither day nor night, only suspended. Then the radio clicked 3 times in even rhythm, and a voice came through. At first, it was backward speech, harsh, reversed consonants tumbling through static. The sergeant raised a hand for silence. The men leaned closer, listening to something that didn't quite sound human, yet carried the unmistakable cadence of language. The transmission repeated twice, each time slower, more deliberate. One of the interpreters, pale and sweating, said it almost resembled Russian, but fragmented, like the words were being dismantled mid-sentence. Then, without command, the operator replayed the recording. The sound began normally, but halfway through, everyone froze. The words had changed. What now came through were faint versions of their own voices, phrases they themselves had spoken minutes earlier. The captain heard his own line, "Check the coordinates again," repeated in perfect tone, followed by another voice replying, "Copy that." The same conversation, folded back into their ears like an echo from the past. One man tore off his headset and threw it to the sand. He could still hear it, distant but clear, like the voice had detached itself from the machine and drifted into the open air. Another swore he saw ripples move beneath the dunes, brief and circular, as if the ground had received a signal and was answering. The transmission ended as suddenly as it began, leaving only the slow hum of the engines. No one recorded the next 10 minutes. Later, every log listed the same explanation: equipment malfunction. Yet every man in that convoy swore the radio had spoken their words first, before they ever said them. By morning, the air felt heavier, as if the night had forgotten to lift. The squad moved in silence, their boots pressing slow imprints into sand that seemed to breathe back with each step. The captain ordered seismic sensors placed in a wide perimeter. They were standard issue, designed to detect ground movement, footsteps, vehicle vibrations. What they registered that day, however, did not match any of those patterns. The first readings came in steady bursts, short, deliberate intervals, forming a rhythm almost too precise to be natural. The operator frowned, zooming in on the waveform. The pattern resembled Morse code but reversed. When decoded backward, it yielded nonsense. SOLD, followed by a scatter of unreadable breaks. The captain dismissed it as false positives caused by shifting sand density. The operator didn't argue, but he kept watching. At 14:17 hours, the sensors picked up a sudden increase. 12 distinct pulses, evenly spaced, coming from directly beneath their feet. The ground trembled faintly, though not from machinery or weather. One soldier pressed his palm to the surface. The vibration climbed through his bones like an echo wearing skin. They dug. The top layer of sand slid away too easily, revealing a patch of metal. Corroded helmets, shattered comm cables, bits of fabric hardened into the color of stone. The oldest among them recognized Soviet make, relics of a war long absorbed by the earth. But it wasn't the sight that silenced them. It was the sound. As they unearthed the debris, the vibrations grew clearer, a deep, slow resonance that seemed to come from the metal itself. One soldier whispered, "It's still transmitting." No one answered. The wind had stopped again, as if waiting for confirmation. That night, exhaustion fell over the camp like fine dust. Silent, weightless, impossible to shake off. The men spoke little during dinner, eating from cold ration packs, glancing often toward the ridge they had dug earlier. The desert had gone perfectly still again, not a hint of wind. Even the stars felt closer, watching. Before sleeping, the communications officer set his recorder to capture ambient sound, hoping to log more interference for analysis. It ran all night, its small red light blinking faintly by the tent flap. In the morning, he forgot to turn it off. It wasn't until midday, when reviewing the file, that he noticed something strange. The first hour was silence, natural, steady. Then, beneath the hum of the generator, a faint murmur began to form. It rose and fell in soft patterns, layered like overlapping breaths. Listening closely, he realized they were human voices, but not distinct ones. They were blurred, as if several men were whispering the same words at slightly different times. Then came the unmistakable part. One of those voices was his own. He played it again, heart slow but heavy. The recording captured them sleeping, low snores, shifting fabric, occasional mutters. Then, exactly 43 minutes in, his voice whispered a phrase he had never said aloud. "It's under the tent." The words repeated twice more, each version slightly delayed, as though the desert was practicing pronunciation. He called the captain, who listened without expression. "Could be playback distortion," he said finally, and shut the recorder off. But that night, no one truly slept. Each man lay awake, breathing carefully, half listening for the faint echo that now seemed to live under every layer of sand. Some swore they heard their own names whispered once before dawn. Not loud, not cruel, just curious, like something learning how to speak. The storm came without warning. One moment, the horizon shimmered with dry heat. The next, it folded into darkness. The wind arrived low and slow, like a throat clearing somewhere beyond sight. Within minutes, fine sand began to rise, swirling around the camp in looping spirals that refused to scatter. Radios hissed, tents strained, and every sound seemed to carry an echo stretched too far, as if the desert was rehearsing its own voice. Through the noise, something peculiar emerged, a tone buried beneath the storm's roar. It wasn't melody, not exactly, but it carried rhythm. A rise, a fall, then a pause. The human ear knows instinctively when it hears breath, even through chaos, and that was what this sounded like. Hundreds of breaths moving in unison, deep within the wind. The captain ordered the recorders switched on. Their meters spiked erratically, then steadied into visible harmonics, frequencies that matched the human vocal range. One soldier muttered a prayer under his breath, though even he could barely hear himself. The sound grew fuller, as though the air had layered itself with every forgotten syllable the desert had ever heard. It wasn't frightening, it was sad, almost reverent, like a choir buried beneath miles of sand trying to remember a song. When the storm passed, it left the world in complete stillness. Sand coated every surface in smooth, perfect symmetry. Later, analysts would find the recordings preserved clear vocal frequencies hidden under the wind noise. Different languages, different tones, all sharing one pattern. Breath turning to voice, voice dissolving back into wind. Someone murmured, "The land remembers." No one replied. The desert had gone silent again, but its quiet now sounded alive. Years later, when the operation had long been archived and the men scattered back into ordinary lives, fragments of those recordings surfaced online. They appeared anonymously, uploaded to forgotten forums, mislabeled as Cold War transmissions, shared and deleted within hours. The sound quality was poor, but the signature was unmistakable. Layered frequencies, equal parts wind and whisper, woven into patterns that shouldn't exist in natural acoustics. A retired signals analyst stumbled upon one of these clips while cataloguing old intercepts. He ran it through frequency separation software and found something he couldn't explain. Underneath the environmental noise were several voices overlapping in perfect intervals, each with unique pitch, timbre, and tone. It wasn't distortion, it was harmony. The data markers indicated the recording times differed by years, yet all carried the same recurring signal structure, identical down to microsecond precision. When cross-referenced with topographic data, the coordinates aligned perfectly with that forgotten ridge outside Khost, the same grid once marked temporary outpost. The analyst, cautious but curious, requested additional samples from military archives. Weeks later, he received 2 more files labeled Field, Echo 92A and Echo 07B. Both contained the same background pattern: faint breathing, low mechanical hum, and distant voices speaking in no identifiable language. The analyst's report was brief. He noted that the recordings seemed to originate not from above ground, but from below it. His conclusion was understated. Source undetermined. Frequencies not of radio origin. The document was quietly filed away, unread by most. But the audio survived, copied endlessly, drifting through the internet like an old signal still looking for someone who remembered hearing it first. It was a linguist from Prague who finally took the recording seriously. He wasn't a soldier, not even a specialist in encryption, just a quiet academic whose research focused on phonetic drift in forgotten dialects. A colleague sent him the files as a curiosity, expecting a short dismissal. Instead, he spent the next 3 months listening. He mapped every breath, every pause, every tonal inflection that rose beneath the static. What he found unsettled him enough to write a classified paper titled Echo Structures of Khost. According to his analysis, the voices weren't random. Each carried consistent phonetic elements that loosely resembled both Russian and Pashto, but neither in full. The vowels came from one, the consonants from the other, as though 2 languages were trying to meet in the middle and failing by a fraction of sound. Stranger still, the rhythms of speech formed near-perfect symmetrical patterns, each phrase mirrored backward, like an auditory reflection. He proposed an unsettling theory, that the land itself had become a kind of phonographic medium. The minerals beneath Khost, dense with iron, salt, and old communication cabling, could, under the right pressure and temperature, store and refract vibrations the way film captures light. In simpler terms, he wrote, the ground may remember sound. When he presented this to a small defense symposium, the response was polite silence. A few attendees dismissed it as metaphor. One colonel laughed, but a handful of intelligence officers requested copies of his data, asking quietly if the echo phenomenon could explain missing drone frequencies in the region. The linguist refused further interviews. He claimed the voices in the final recording no longer followed linguistic logic. They were imitating him. His own intonations, his pacing, his breath. When he stopped playback, he could still hear faint syllables, perfectly timed, repeating what he just said a heartbeat late. He never studied sound again. When a small documentary crew revisited Khost years later, the war had already shifted elsewhere. The desert looked calmer now, clean, unmarked, as though nothing had ever happened there. But the locals still avoided the ridge. They called it Zamin-e-Khamosh, the land that doesn't sleep. The crew arrived before dawn, armed with high-end audio recorders and ground-penetrating mics, hoping to verify what they dismissed as superstition. The morning passed uneventfully. The wind moved gently across the dunes, steady and warm. Birds crossed the horizon for the first time in decades. The cameras captured only emptiness, beautiful, silent emptiness. But as the sun began to fall, something changed. The air grew dense, muffled, as if every sound had been covered with cloth. Even footsteps lost their texture. The lead sound engineer checked his meters. They were reading input, though no audio played through his headset. A soft pulse emerged, faint but regular, like breathing behind glass. Then just before night, one microphone recorded a long exhale. It wasn't the wind. It was too measured, too deliberate. Another mic caught a whisper. Not words, only the suggestion of them, shaped by rhythm, rather than language. The team packed up before full dark. Back in Kabul, they reviewed the footage. The final file, the one recorded last, contained a low harmonic tone rising beneath the silence. The engineer ran a frequency match. It was identical to the one captured by the soldiers years before. He shut the laptop, said nothing, and never published the documentary. What they'd filmed wasn't a haunting, it was a repetition, as if the desert, tired of being unheard, had decided to reenact the act of listening itself. By the end of the week, command ordered a full withdrawal. No official reason was given. The patrol packed their equipment in the grey light before dawn, movements quiet and deliberate, as if afraid to wake something that might still be listening. The wind had returned, soft and steady, brushing over the dunes in long exhalations. It sounded almost like relief. One by one, they loaded their vehicles. The captain stayed last, checking the perimeter, making sure nothing was left behind. Yet even as they drove away, the instruments in the lead vehicle flickered to life. Power readings climbing. Though no generators ran, the radio clicked once, then again, matching the same patient rhythm from their first night in Khost. The men pretended not to hear. By the time they reached the edge of the valley, the frequency had stopped. The convoy halted briefly to watch a column of sand rise where their camp once stood, spiraling upward like smoke. It dissolved within seconds, leaving no trace. 3 days later, local shepherds found abandoned cables humming softly in the wind. When touched, they vibrated faintly, as though still carrying a signal. The engineers who returned to collect them reported that even disconnected, the wires emitted low resonance for several hours before going silent. Satellite imagery later showed new shapes forming along the ridge. Circular, faintly luminous at night, shifting like dunes rearranging themselves with purpose. The images were dismissed as lens artifacts. No one went back to verify. Khost was quiet again, but in the recordings of that last day, beneath the hum of engines, there's one more pulse. Steady, alive, almost content. Like the land, after years of listening, was finally breathing on its own. The official report came months later, filed quietly under routine communication anomalies. It carried no warnings, no conclusions, just data tables, transmission times, and short summaries written in neutral language. At the bottom of the last page was a signature, Lieutenant Col Arman Qureshi, Military Archives Division. His tone was factual, efficient, as though the story he was cataloguing had already gone cold. Yet between the lines, something flickered, a hesitation in phrasing, a deliberate vagueness. He noted that auditory phenomena consistent with layered radio reflections were observed, followed by a curious sentence. The signals ceased upon cessation of human activity. It was not highlighted, not annotated, simply there. Quiet, waiting to be noticed. Qureshi had listened to every recording himself, alone. Late nights in a soundproof archive where the hum of the fluorescent lights became company. He told no one how often he replayed the final track, the one from the withdrawal. In it, he claimed to hear something faint beneath the static. His own name, spoken once, perfectly clear, before dissolving into the hum. He tried to isolate the frequency, but found nothing measurable, just the lingering sense that the silence between the waves carried more truth than the noise itself. His closing remark read, "No further analysis recommended." The file was sealed under reference code K47A, and the recordings were transferred to deep storage. In later inventories, the file's audio section was marked missing. No one knew if it had been misplaced or deliberately removed, but a rumor spread among clerks who worked the night shift that sometimes, when the archive was quiet enough, the speakers clicked once, softly, rhythmically, as if something buried deep in the database was still awake, waiting to be heard again. Years later, travelers passing through Khost would say the desert there had a strange kind of peace. Not emptiness, not silence, peace. The wind moved differently, slower, like it remembered the rhythm of another voice. Nothing unusual grew there, yet the sand carried an odd sheen under moonlight, faintly silver, as if reflecting something buried too deep to see. The last man who'd served on that patrol returned once, unannounced. He stood where the camp had been and found nothing, no cables, no tracks, no proof they had ever existed. But when he knelt and pressed his palm to the ground, he felt a heartbeat, not his own, but steady, pulsing far below. It faded the moment he pulled away. He stayed until dusk, listening to the air shift. Every gust seemed to carry fragments of a tone he couldn't place. A hum without direction, somewhere between wind and thought. Before leaving, he whispered a single word into the sand. Enough. For a long time, nothing moved. Then the surface trembled once, softly like acknowledgement. He never spoke of it afterward. People say the desert of Khost is quiet now, but anyone who stands there long enough can feel it. The slow pulse beneath their feet, patient and deliberate. Maybe it isn't an echo. Maybe it's memory learning to breathe.